Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Michael Wilson, and you're listening to the Lone Star Conservative, brought to you by Texcellent AC Service. Very exciting guest right now. We have Troy Miller on the line. He is the president and CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters Association, and I'm very excited to get into this new breaking report. Welcome to the show, Troy.
Hey, thanks for having me today. Great to be with you.
Of course, and we're very excited because this is a fascinating story, one that affirms my own anecdotal evidence, but one that I am very, very pleasantly unsurprised by. It's a matter of time watching the demographic shift in this country swing towards a more grounded conservative worldview. So let's jump into it. Can you start off by giving us a little bit of background on your association and, of course, what this report is going over?
Yeah, so the NRB has been around for 81 years. Our primary role is to advocate on behalf of Christian communicators, broadcasters in the public space. So we work hard to make sure they can stay there, and there's no, hindrances, which has been really busy the last several years with all the weaponization of government. Mm-hmm. But we do that, and then we help ministries do what they do with excellence. So that's the two major purposes of the NRB. So we wanted to look last fall. We decided, what kind of impact is Christian ministry having, especially outside of the local church? So we worked with Barna. We did this survey to say, to figure out what people's views, how much they're using Christian ministry. And again, the caveat was not including any kind of media that comes from your local church.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, I'm not devaluing the church at all, but there is a reality that we have got to have people that are in the culture, in the secular spaces that people are paying attention to and getting their information from. And I'm glad that you guys conducted this report because it's important that people are aware of how this country is shifting. I often say one of my main jobs as a radio host, frankly speaking, is not just to make change, but to expose what's going on so that people can help make change. Because if we don't know what's going on, we can't change anything. That's the first step. And so I'm really proud of you guys for running this survey and for getting information. So can you tell us what you discovered?
Yeah. So one of the big things right out of the bat, and I think it really shows what you talked about earlier, the shift here is that Christian media, 60% of Americans, that's all Americans, not just Christians, evangelicals, that's Americans, use Christian media in some form. That makes Christian media one of the largest genres out there on radio, television, and social media. So 60% of the country. 28% of Christian media users are heavy users, which means they interact with it at least once a day. So this was really good. And another thing that I think you're getting to that was really great was the fact that the number of young adults that interact. Gen Z leads the way with 64% engaging in Christian social media accounts, followed by millennials at 58%. So that makes Christian media, especially in the social platforms, one of the most powerful messages out there.
Yeah, and I want to point out on this note, Troy, I say this frequently. I loved when we changed it to the Gulf of America, and I said, a lot of people are calling it a gimmick, all these things. I said, but the way that we refer to things and understand things will have an impact on our psychological condition. It will impact what we believe. God rooted us. This is why he says, have joy always. The reality is because when you don't, that will impact the way you see the world. A lot of the clinical depression we're seeing nowadays is due to people that have no hope, and they focus on that. They think about it all day, every day. And so what we've been told recently by the mainstream media, by politicians, is, Christianity is dying out with the boomers. I mean, they're the last conservative generation. Once they're gone, we win. And when they do that, the implication isn't necessarily that it's true, it's that people start to believe it and they give up hope. And the reality is, I've been saying for a long time, I'm like, no, I think Generation Z is actually going to be carrying the torch of Christianity in this nation, and they're going to be raising kids that are then going to take it even further. And I refuse to believe that Generation Z is some super liberal, super progressive, super anti-Christian generation. And your report is actually confirming that for me.
Yeah, you take this report with other reports about young men, heading back to the church at a huge rate, turning conservative here. And you're right. Look, one of the other things in this report that was so encouraging, but to me not that alarming, was the fact that 66% of Americans saw Christian media as valuable and trustworthy. And 66% of media users say they use it as an alternative to mainstream media. And you're right, mainstream media has pushed this message, this dystopian kind of message. It's all despair. It's all hate. It's all messages that try to divide us rather than unite us. And it's a message that really takes our hope away. And what we're seeing is that message is being rejected at a very large scale.
Yeah, and I'm especially excited because, and I've said this before, but I think for a long time, a lot of the problem was due to the fact that the only media we had from Christianity that was large scale was a lot of the times coming from the church. And a lot of young men seemed disenfranchised because they just saw messages of this and that, and they didn't see like a strong worldview. And a lot of young men were like, we want something that's strong. We want something that tells us that we were made for more, that we can actually have impacts. And a lot of Christian media nowadays is heading back in that direction to say, no, we can make change. In fact, God calls us to make change in the culture and to produce better results, better fruits, to change the way that we view the world. And so I'm very excited. I try every day on my show. I say, look, all the stuff that I say, because mine's primarily conservative, local news, these sorts of politics. I say my goal is that anything I'm ever asked on, I can root it back to Christianity and say, this is why I believe what I believe. Whether I'm talking about the justice system, law enforcement, judges, the mayor, any story that I'm going over, the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying is directly rooted in faith, in my faith in the Word of God as the ultimate arbiter of truth. And I think a lot of young men are starting to realize that this subjective methodology that the secular world has proposed for interpreting morals and ethics and reality, they say, well, that literally doesn't work. It can't work. Definitionally, it doesn't work. And so they're like, what is there that promotes an objective basis for everything that we believe? And the only answer that they're now turning to is, oh, look at that, the Word of God.
Right. It's the only thing that's, filling that gap there. And that's, I think, why they're turning away from mainstream media and legacy media to this media. Another statistic in there, as you said, that really hit this home again, was that the top users cited encouragement as one of the number one reasons why they turn to Christian media, and then followed very closely by their desire to love God with their whole heart, mind, and to learn more about the Bible. So they're not just tuning into Christian media as a therapeutic kind of, alternative. They're turning into Christian media, as you said, for real answers, for objective truth, for absolute truth, in a world that just feeds them relative. I'm sorry, but it's relative garbage.
Yeah, it is. And I say, there's been a significant portion, at least in my experience in the right-wing circles, of this rise of what I call Christless conservatism that wants the conservative Republican principles, but they ignore the foundational basis for where those conservative Republican principles came from. And I'm very ecstatic because there could have been a major concern that young people liked the conservatism, but they're like, we don't really want the Jesus side of it. We don't really want the religious stuff. We don't really want to change our morals. We just want a return to American values and secularism. And these numbers are disposing of the myth that that's what young men want. It's not just that they're consuming the media because it's more conservative. They're consuming the media because they actually love Christ. And that, I don't know of anything more encouraging than that.
Right. You nailed it there. That's right. They're not just out for a safe, prosperous country. They're out for an American dream that the Puritans had and the Pilgrims had, to give them something deeper in their lives, a meaning, a purpose, and they're finding it in Christian media. And
I love that Christian media, especially nowadays, has gotten so much more brazen in their refusal to just adhere to the status quo. I say frequently on my show, I'm like, you guys have to remember context whenever we talk about history. I'm like, for years they tried to convince us that separation of church and state was a pinnacle of the founders when it absolutely wasn't. The founders never envisioned a country. I mean, even John Adams said that this Constitution not only was designed for, but will only work for a moral and religious group of people, that it's not designed and it won't work for any other. And young men have heard that, and they started rewriting the narrative to say, look, actual historical accounts of the founders, which were well over 90% Christian. You had state governments that were inherently Christian at every level. You had blasphemy laws in states after the Constitution was ratified, so they didn't view it as unconstitutional to have laws against blaspheming the God of the Bible. Even Thomas Jefferson, one of the only deists among the founders, had blasphemy laws when he was governor in the state of Virginia that he didn't veto. He believed in them. They had Sabbath laws. They had things that today they would tell you, no, that's so anti-constitutional. That's not what the founders wanted when they wrote it. And it's like, actually it is. The founders were Christian, and they believed in a nation that while you weren't bound to worship Christ by a single denomination, they certainly believed that this country was made. The American dream is synonymous with Western Christendom. And you can't, you try to separate those two things. And that's why the young people are waking up and saying, look, that not only doesn't work, we have empirical evidence it didn't work. Once you separate those, we don't have a basis.
Right, and they look around at the culture today, and you look around at the cities, the governance of states that have tried to separate that, and those cities, those states are in anarchy. And they realize that without that moral foundation that Christianity provides, without that base, without that truth, then the rest of it, as you said, it's a house of cards. It just falls apart very quickly. And again, I think that the thing that was so encouraging about these young adults in this study was the fact that it's not just lip service. They're really reaching out, and they're engaging. And so this kind of really dispels all the stereotypes that the mainstream media would like to, as you said, portray Christian media as the old days of the, pink hair televangelist. These are very educated people as well. They're intellectual, and they're understanding and searching for answers they're not getting anywhere else.
And it's especially exciting because, as I've mentioned, like on my show, like I said, my show would not generally be described as like a Christian theology show, and yet my show is 99% rooted in historical Christianity. Like almost all that I'm talking about when I talk about how I view the justice system, a lot of the problems we're having with crime. I'm down here, of course, in Harris County, where we have a lot of activist judges that will give bond to criminals. We have hundreds of homicides a year that are committed by criminals out on bond. And I say a lot of these problems are largely due to because we're not following the foundation of justice that was established by God. God is the ultimate justice giver. He's the ultimate judge. And if we're not formulating our justice response in a Christian foundation, well, then of course it's going to fail. And we have a Christian Chamber of Commerce, I think one of the only in the state down here. And I was so encouraged because the guy that runs it, he said, look, you know why we're still a conservative Chamber of Commerce? Because you had a conservative Chamber of Commerce east of us that's no longer conservative because they said, no, we don't want to play the religious game. We're just conservative. And then within 5 or 10 years, they were established fully liberal. He's like, that's where it goes if you're not rooted in the objective truth that produces conservatism. Conservatism is simply a symptom of Christianity.
Right. It's an outcome of the foundation of Christianity, conservatism, and so is freedom. Our freedom is without the base of Christianity, we have no freedom here. And so just again, I want to go back to this one thing because 2/3 of the general population, that's a general population, viewed Christian media as valuable and trustworthy. Right now, the mainstream media, their number sets down in the maybe upper teens. At the best, they're one of the most untrusted sources out there, and so this is very encouraging for programs like yours and other Christian programs. You're being effective. You're reaching people, and you're making an impact in their lives.
And it's so cool that you mentioned freedom because I always say when the founders wrote all this stuff, they said God-given rights. If you remove the God part of that and it just is given rights, then who gives it? Well, the government does. Then they can give and they can take away. And so when you don't root it in that, you see ultimate failure because that's where it will always go. Well, Troy, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been very encouraging to hear the empirical side of the evidence. I'm so glad you guys conducted the survey and got it done. Can you tell people how they can stay involved with your organization? It's very important, the work that you guys are doing at every single facet. Can you tell people how they can get involved and keep up to date with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so you can go to nrb.org, and on there you can track all that we're doing, all the legislative and legal work that we're doing. You can also find out about our annual conference, which will be in February of 2026 in Nashville, Tennessee.
Awesome. Well, Troy, again, one more time, I want to thank you so much for coming on, for being so encouraging, and Lord willing, we'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We'll talk to you again.